Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. And what an honor it is to bring in a guy who was he was raised in Mississippi and Chicago. It was a bastion of Delta blues and cats on Market Street, blind dobro players, just cooking up their own sound. And eventually, he made it over to an incredibly established record company, Atlantic Records, and worked his way up into promotion and was there for arguably, in this host's mind, maybe the greatest era of modern American music. And, he was the one that was basically determining what should be radio play, what is radio friendly, and then trying to drive that to the radio stations. And just by cosmic coincidence last week, although I don't believe in coincidence, I was talking to, doing my fourth interview with dear friend Brian Auger, and he mentioned that when he went in to Atlantic Records, when he was on Atco, walked up the stairs, the first person he bumped into was my next guest. And then my guest said, "Hey, I want you to take you down to Count Basie's." Brian said, "Sure, man, what's the address? I'll meet you down there." And my guest said, No, I'll take you down. And to be honest with you, at 43 years old, it's kind of my dream is to meet someone like my guest back when Harlem was a flourishing jazz scene and be escorted down there into a beautiful vibe and dance the night away. Mario Medious, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Yeah, thanks, man. Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure, man. Hey, did you know a cat named Cash McCall?
I didn't know him personally, but I knew of him.
You know why? Because his dad was a sharecropper in Mississippi, and eventually he worked his way up to Chicago. I think he came later than you. I just am curious about your folks, your dad specifically, and if in fact you came from a sharecropper family as well.
Yeah, of course. My grandfather was a sharecropper in Lexington, Mississippi. That's where I was born. And he was like he had his own farm, but of course he was sharing it with Mr. Sweeney. And I was raised pretty nice down there as far as he was concerned. Everybody respected my grandparent. And that place, Lexington, Mississippi, is right near where Emmett Till was killed, so a whole lot of stuff went down.
So I for some reason I thought Emmett Till was killed in Missouri. He was killed in Mississippi.
Mississippi, yeah, and I was the same age he was. So
can you talk about that? Did you see the Jet magazine when you were a little boy?
Yeah, of course. We got Jet every week.
I mean, just as a young man, I mean, you're just a boy. I mean, can you talk about, in retrospect, like how, obviously it was a horribly shock. I guess, it was shocking, but not surprising.
Right.
But can you talk about how that impacted fundamentally your point of view on life, the rest of your life?
Well, how the first 17 years of my life I spent in Mississippi, but I would go to Chicago in the summer. But that 17 years affected my life totally, because as far as I was concerned, black people weren't free,
Right.
And the only time I ever felt free in my life until this day was when I got off the plane in Paris when I was 17. Got off the plane in Paris, I was 17, and I went to get a cab. And the way that people treated me was completely different than the way I had been treated before. I could understand why all the jazz musicians didn't want to come back to America if they went to Europe, But at the same time, that stays with you forever. I don't give a fuck what nobody says. It stays with you forever. But you got to learn how to let it wash off your back. Otherwise, you would be completely mentally ill. And of course, I always respected everybody. But I learned that there were good people after I went to Europe, All Caucasians weren't crazy.
No, well, you're absolutely right. Although I will say there is, this is spoken from somebody who hasn't ever been there, but there is racism there too.
Racism everywhere.
Exactly. I hear it's the original sin of this country. Mario, I couldn't ask a better person. I'm 43. I went to college in the late 90s. The mother of my children is from Taiwan, so I'm very much, and I mean, I've dedicated my whole show to to the world of music. We all are, in my mind, one human race. But I was naive enough to think that we were living through a post-racial society in the late '90s. Obviously, Barack Obama gets elected. I thought I was the main reason I started my show because I couldn't believe this is like a very moderate, smart, decent dude, and I couldn't believe the way he was being treated. That's honestly when I started my show in 2011, and I was talking to Richard Davis and Joe Chambers and Jack DeJohnette about this country's, the cultural bias and the horrible history of this country. And I just wonder, being that we've been dragged through horrible situation collectively the last 6 years, have we made any progress since Emmett Till? Are we going backward now?
I mean, there's always some progress that's being made, but a lot of stuff is embedded in the country and will be there forever until people's mind change. And you can't force someone to love people, But one thing I loved about music was it was international language, If you could read music in America, you could read it in any language. So that was like a brotherhood as far as I was concerned. And if the world was like that, it would be a much better place. But I don't ever see any too many changes, as far as that's concerned.
Some people would say, well, Mario, you had such a prolific career in all these great record companies. What are you whining about? There's no racism.
No, I don't whine, but I didn't take anything. You could ask Ahmed or Jerry Wexler. I never took anything. I was an accountant first,
Right.
So I made checks. I paid people. I knew what everybody made in the company. I knew all the businesses. I was a businessman. I knew and understood business, but at the same time, I knew the dilemma of America. Music was something I loved and would always love. Made no difference what color the person was or whatever. Music is either good or is bad with me. If I like it, it's good. If I don't like it, it's not.
That's Duke Ellington right there, man.
Yeah, but that's the same way I feel. Same way.
I dig. No, I want to ask you, when you would go to Chicago, it was kind of revelatory to me. I was interviewing Charlie Musselwhite, and he was just talking about, I think, Howlin' Wolf and Muddy. Those were like the only two cats who had like steady gigs playing music. Most cats were in the factories. Can you talk a little bit about the life of the black musician when you would go there during the summer? Because it was not like they were playing. It wasn't like they were making their living just playing music, except for the iconic cats.
But at the same time, they were like superstars to me,
Right.
Because I grew up. My grandfather was a harmonica player. My grandfather was my father was born in Clarksdale, Mississippi.
Wow.
My grandfather used to blow harmonica and would give me a harmonica every Christmas, so for me to learn it. And I always listened to Sonny Boy Williamson, and that was before the chess thing was happening. And I would always say, Sonny Boy can really play. He said, oh, Sonny Boy can't play. That's what he was saying. My grandfather could blow, boy. He would
Wow, dude. So he was just like did he have like a local a family band or just play?
No, he didn't have a band. He was a baseball fanatic, so he managed baseball teams.
That's pretty cool. Like Negro League teams?
Yeah, Negro League.
Wow, holy cow!
It wasn't a national team. It was just a local team. And every weekend they would have games, and it'd be like buku people all packed up on the roads, cars stopped, white and black, to see these people play. And my father was a catcher for his team,
Holy wait! And you're talking. I just want to. This is so. He was also working Mr. Sweeney's land, so to speak.
Yep. He was the foreman of that land. He had people working for him. He had like 300 or 400 acres he was taking care of. And I would go out there and see all the mules he had. He'd feed the mules and the cows and the stuff, and they were all his as far as he was concerned, because the man never bugged him about anything. As a matter of fact, he stopped even having to share the finance with it. He would just take him wood and stuff like that. But I got to meet him, and Mr. Sweeney was like this richest man in Lexington. And any time any one of his grandkids had no problem in that city, even though white people hated you, they would see us walking across the square, and they said, well, that's Tom Meter's grandson, let him know, let him go. So we never had any problem.
Oh, my. Well, okay. Well, That, I mean, you're really blowing me away right now, man. Like, I mean, I know you were a boy, but, and I mean, I've interviewed Sonny Charles and I've interviewed Cash, and I mean, Sonny's parents also grew up. His dad was a sharecropper, but I know that your grandpa had to stand up, maybe not to Sweeney, but I mean,
Everybody.
did he?
Everybody.
Did you actually witness him like advocating for himself? Because I remember.
Look,
Go ahead.
man, let me just tell you this about my grandfather. The sheriff, everybody respected him because he was a marksman. He had been in the parksman and was a trustee at Parksman, where he was like shooting people left and right as they try to escape. He told me that himself. He taught me how to shoot. At the same time, a lot of people in that town told me a history of my grandfather in that town. When my father cut up Joe Devine, who was a white man with a razor, and had to leave town because they wanted to lynch him and wanted to beat him up or whatever. But the whole squad, about 100, I guess a truckload, about 100 white people or 50 white people, came to my grandfather's door one night, and he had his Winchester sitting on his lap. And they said, Tom, look, we ain't gonna hurt you, boy. We got to whoop. We can't let him get away with this. And he said, Sheriff Sweeney, Sheriff Brady, I got about eight shots in here. I might not kill everybody, but I'm gonna kill you first.
Oh my God!
And this is stuff he never told me. People in that town told me.
Oh my!
And
wow!
And they actually somehow or another they end up just letting it go, let it slide. And he sit out there all night with his Winchester, man, ready to. And that was. And Mr. Sweeney also came down and told him to let him go. They leave him alone, but he was ready to die, and his son wasn't even there at the time.
That to me. So, did your dad and your grandpa have a good relationship?
Yeah, they was a good relationship.
They have a good relationship. So it wasn't like he was just a screw up, and like.
Yeah, he was a screw up. My father was a screw up.
Yeah, because it would be very hard to live. It'd be very hard to live in the shadow of that. Your grandfather sounds like a monster.
You, man.
Yeah.
My father would come down to Lexington from Chicago and give my grandfather suits and hats. Back in those days, big suits and hats.
Oh, beautiful stuff. Yeah.
He would give him all that stuff, but he would get drunk on that corn liquor and act a fool. And my grandfather, I had to keep him from killing his own son several times. He was going up to get the shotgun to blow his brains out. That's how crazy my family was.
Your dad was suicidal?
No, my dad was not suicidal. My grandfather was going to kill him for disrespecting him. You didn't disrespect a grown person back then.
I mean, going back to, so it was clear when Sheriff Brady showed up, they already knew very well who your grandfather was.
They knew who he was. They didn't come to do anything but take out my father and whip him. That's what they said they wanted.
No, I dig. I mean, was there like, did you hear about a story like the first, like the beginnings? What was your grandpa's name, by the way?
Tommy was his name, but everybody called him Tom.
Your grandpa Tom, the earliest memory of like people saying that man is a decent person. Do not cross him. like when he first solidified himself. I mean, at a certain point, they already knew when they showed up there, and they didn't even move once he said, "I got 8 shots." They were like, "We're gone." But he was already established at that point. Is there like that definitive beginning story that you ever heard of?
Look, I heard the story from several people in Lexington as I was growing up there, because we lived right on Bill Street, which is like the main black street, where all the juke joints and everything were. We lived there, and my grandmother had a beauty shop on that street. So they were business, she was a businesswoman. And everybody on the street knew us. They knew the Medious because I roller skated and everything up and down that street until I graduated high school down there. And also, I ended up working, for the grocery store uptown, and working for a guy named Mr. Leon, who had the grocery store, IGA. And I was working around him, and he always treated me really well. I learned a lot from him. He was a hillbilly and everything, and, praises of the devil. But he always said, he called me Junior. Junior's a good boy. He's a good old boy. He just spilled ink,
No.
But I mean, all of that stuff. I grew up when they first passed the law for we're integrating schools and so on. I was taking out packages to people's cars, and I would hear them saying, "No in the hell, I'm going to let them niggas go to school with my kids." You know, you right there. They don't care. They would say it right in front of you.
Dude, how did you... Man, I'm so freaking blown away. Were there any other kids of color that were treated the way you, in terms of they left the families alone, or were you guys like the one?
Well, they had a couple. My friend, Baby Junior, who his parents had a 1 hour merchandising cleaners where everybody came. You know, white and black people came to put their clothes in, and he had 1957 Chevrolet just like the white kids. You know, I used to ride with him in his car, and you know, they didn't bother him as well because his parents was well known, you know, in the community. Those two families were the only two that I can think of, and that they didn't mess with.
Wow, this is stunning. I mean, so, and at the time, was it, were you hip to, when did you become aware that there was, was it a full black commerce town that you were in? Like all black?
Yeah, of course. I went to a black school. It was a full black school where Barry McLeod Bethune came and so on. You know, like in the president of our school was well known all over America because the school had kids that come from all over America to go there, but they're all black. And on May 1st or May Day, we would have a parade through the town of that Lexington, where all the white people would come out to see it, but all black kids are dressed up in black kings and queens marching up and down the street, and they loved it because it was economically beneficial for the town. And
wow, you're telling me white cats would show up to watch the parade?
Look, man, the whole white town, the whole town would come up to watch it. It was a big thing every year.
Holy
I can send you pictures of all this stuff. I got pictures of all.
I mean, I how did you learn to? Well, no, I mean, were you? When did you become aware of like or what was the sort of music scene like? I mean, you go back to North Tulsa. This is like more like, like that, everyone knows that now, the Holiday and everybody. I mean, I've interviewed all those cats that that scene was like,
Well, like, first of all, B.B. King, if you read his autobiography, he stayed in Lexington for a while. He said that's where he saw his first hanging. And, but B.B. was known in Lexington because he had gotten a show in D.C., in Memphis. So, everybody knew him, and they were complaining when I was growing up because he was switching to electric guitar.
Right. They were belly aching about that.
They thought that was BS, They thought it was horrible. But
who was they? The journalists or the cats?
Just the people on the street.
Wow. So they really wanted the acoustic blues. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And also they listened to the show, but at the same time, all the cats like Elmo James, everybody came through Lexington going to Canton, which is about 30 miles down the road from Lexington, because Lexington having a place they could play. But the juke joint in Canton, that's where all the blues cats went to play. And people from Lexington would go to Lexington and Chula, Durant, all those people, they would go down to Canton to see these blues guys. But they would go through Lexington, but they didn't stop in Lexington because they knew it was like one of the worst towns of all. But I mean, like, to me, it was home because I grew up there, and I must admit I had a lot of good times there. But at the same time, what you don't know don't hurt you.
Oh, absolutely. You're really. You know what it is? I guess maybe for me, I mean, I really get. I mean, maybe it's just being insecure sometimes, but I can tolerate a lot, but I don't like disrespect. And
yeah, I don't stand for any disrespect.
Well, no. My question is like, I mean, how did you learn to keep your heart open? It's easy to say, but it's so hard to do. Like when you're working with that hillbilly, and okay, you're getting some money, it's a gig, but he's still really insulting you. I mean,
I must admit, this guy was Mr. Leon Armstrong. I learned more about business from him.
Wow.
Anyone else.
Wow.
And he treated me. I learned the entire grocery business from him.
Wow.
I went from putting stuff on the shelf to checking in those tractors and trailers when the thing come in and writing the sales on the window, working in the butcher department, learn how to do the butcher, learn how to do the produce, everything from him, learn how to operate the cash register. And he thought I was a great kid, I must admit. I mean, even though he
so you did you not only you learned so much that would help you later in your life, but also it wasn't like you just were held down and he'd be like, "Oh, Junior's a good boy." He really did like you.
He really helped me. He really helped me, and really, he was the backbone of me getting. I got the job when I was 12 years old. You know, my first job was working with him in that place, and I worked until I was 16 when I left Mississippi. I worked there for 4 years, and I went to high school. And I would work in the morning before I go to school, and I walk to school and do whatever I had to do. And you know, and the school was like a mile away, so you know, you did that, you did it, and you know, you survived that under those circumstances. But I was always well dressed and clean, you know, always that, you know.
I dig, man. So when you would go, it was before chess, but were you like, when you got to Chicago, were you going to, at the time, like Sonny?
I wasn't old enough to go to all those juke joints at that time.
You weren't going to the juke joint, so
no, because you could hear more stuff on the street. You hear a lot of stuff on the street. When I got to be my first concert was Chuck Berry. I saw him when I was like, I think I was 13 or 14 years old. I went to the Trane ballroom with my mother, with my stepmother, and a girl that lived upstairs named Gladys. You know, who she wanted me to date, and so that was my date. I went to the Trane ballroom on 62nd and Cottage Grove.
Is it in Chicago?
In Chicago.
Okay. Yeah.
To see Chuck Berry, man, and Chuck Berry was like you know, the king for as we're concerned, you know, because I love Chuck Berry.
Oh, amazing, yeah.
And man, so look, that was the first concert I ever went to in my life, and I tell you, that was fantastic. Chuck did all of his stuff, and before the concert was over, you know, it's all black people because everything.
You still there?
It was a ballroom, and everybody was all dressed up, you know, and everything. And as Chuck was finished his, he was still playing, but somebody was dancing, and they stepped on one of these guys' shoes. And this guy got really pissed off, and he pulled out a Pearl Hound white silver pistol, man. I saw that pistol. And the whole dance were cleared, you know. Of course, I came there with my stepmother and my date.
Mm-hmm.
But I was the first person outside. I left him.
You're out. You're running for the hills, dude.
Well, I left. When they got outside, I was outside. You know, she said, you know, you ran left.
You ran like a good.
You better learn how to run. But anyway, that was my first experience, you know, and we didn't go back in after, but the concert was nearly over anyway. But that was my first experience with rock and roll, and, you know, as far as seeing someone. But I always listened to it on the radio.
Can you talk about some memorable street music? I mean, I think that's the most magical part of your early life is just the fact that there were the music was out in the street. It didn't. It was really not even about. It was out in the street in every part of the country, and it dictated culture in some ways.
Yeah, right. But you know, like I saw guys, they would make a bass with one string with a broom handle and a tub.
Oh, I love this, dude.
And they would get washboard, and they would play on the streets there on Bill Street in Lexington. You know, they sit out there and play, but you know, they weren't professional musicians. Nobody professional. Everybody learned to do stuff on their own. They had to figure out a way to make music on their own, but they weren't professional. They weren't known. But at the same time, on all the jukeboxes on Bill Street, all of Chess records were on there. You know, Muddy Waters, Junior Wells, all those cats. I heard all those records, and I would go to the juke joints. You know, I got to know the guy that bring the records and change them. When he changed them, I beg him to give me those 45s. So he let me have the 45s once they take them off, and that's how I started my record collection.
That absolutely so. So what year is that roughly? 65?
No, man, what you talking about? I'm 81 years old.
No, but I mean, like, chess.
It's in the 40s. It's in the 40s, man.
But wait, hold on. But I mean, chess wasn't around in the 40s.
No, I know. I'm not saying they were around in the 40s. I say it was in the 40s, around when I was like 10 years old. They had chess records. They had records on the jukebox.
Okay. And what year would that have been at 10 years old?
About 51 or 52,
50,
something like
early
that.
50s, early 50s.
Yeah,
Got
right.
it. Yeah.
Early 50s. I mean, all those chess records, Atlantic records too. I saw them.
So you were. This is so freaking amazing. You saw.
Man,
You were there.
Yeah.
Is there a way to go ahead? Go ahead.
I had those records. I mean, Atlantic records and chess records. I used to get those records, from the cat after they take them off. Tweedledee D, all that stuff by Laverne Baker and stuff, and a lot of stuff, man. Records that I got, I never realized I would ever be working for Atlantic Records.
Is there a way for you to talk about, I mean, in your own way, you saw Chuck Berry in like 55, roughly, like mid-50s. Can you talk about the evolution of what we know today as rock music? Because, I mean, and also like in jazz, did you get your, who pulled your coat to bebop? This was
My father was a jazz fan and my grandfather was a blues fan.
Holy cow.
And my father hit me to all the jazz stuff. He was crazy about Lionel Hampton and Flying Home, and all that.
Kidding me?
Yeah, I mean, he turned me on all that stuff, and my first jazz record was Dave Brubeck, Jazz Goes to College, something like that.
Well, Paul Desmond, yeah, sure.
And then I got Louis Armstrong, Ambassador, and another record I got was I can't remember now. It was Earl Gunner. Concert by
So sick, dude. Those are just there's like 56, 55 in that range there.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Oh my God, that is. And then the blues. Can you just talk about the merging of those two styles? That was the beginning of the fusion movement, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And see, the whole thing, the blues was always embedded in jazz.
Absolutely.
And people don't realize that a lot of blues cats really could play jazz, but just what happened, blues was simpler,
Absolutely, yeah, totally.
Yeah, and you didn't have to improvise so much. You improvise in jazz, you had to improvise. A lot of space you had to just make up stuff, and it doesn't sound the same all the time. In blues, you had that boom, chukum, that B flat, and stuff like that. They would in jazz they would take it to another level. But at the same time, I love both of those. The reason why I took my job at Atlantic Records was because Trane was on the label. That was the only reason why.
Damn, dude, that is the sickest story. Dude, I just found today like 6 analog tapes of Trane, Black Pearls, all this incredible stuff on analog tape.
Oh yeah, okay, I hear you, man.
Yeah, no, so when did you first see Trane live?
I saw Trane in New York in like before I went into the Air Force. It supposed to have been 1958.
Oh my! Please talk about that experience.
I caught Trane at. I even even after that, I used to catch Trane all the time. Plus, I was a photographer, so I would make photographs.
Oh my! This is so legendary.
I got to meet Trane. I got to meet Monk, Miles, all the cats. I met them because I would make photographs. Roy Haynes, everybody. I knew everybody as far as a photographer.
Sure.
Ron Carter, everybody. And then when I started working at Atlantic, I already had made photographs of so many cats because I worked for English jazz magazine called Crescendo, and I made a lot of photographs for them, right? So, but I would go to all the jazz clubs and make these photographs. So I got to meet Trane and talk with Trane and everything. Trane was like. Trane, Miles, Monk, and Muddy Waters are like my favorite about all the people.
Well, that's about it. You can take that to the grave, man. I mean, so what year did you move to? You saw these cats in New York, I would take it.
Yeah, right. All New York. Yeah.
So when was the year you moved to New York? 57.
57. No, 58. 58.
58. And did you live in Harlem, or where did you live?
No, I lived in Queens. But I would take the subway to E-Train and come into the city. I went to Birdland. The first thing I wanted to do when I got to New York was go to Birdland.
Absolutely. So you must. I mean, and then there was the original Birdland, right?
Yeah, right. And I had cousins there, and they took me around. They took me to Harlem. They took me up there to Apollo, and I caught shows there, and I caught Red Fox at the Baby Grand back when he was doing that stuff about. I was 17 at the time, but I caught Red Fox when he was doing that stuff about the horses, fucking fast and all that.
Dude, I love that stuff. So wait, I just for the audience, and this is so important because Harlem today is all gentrified. It's all pushed around. They pushed the culture off the street. How would you describe that vibe when you got there?
Harlem was heaven for black people back then.
Now, why was it heaven?
Because first of all, you had French restaurants. Frank's was right on 125th Street, right down the street from Apollo, just like being in France. You know what I'm saying?
Oh man!
And you had big pimp mobiles parked all on the street. right next to that was Apollo.
Oh,
and then you got all the clothing joints. The whole street was laid out, man. I mean, plus, like it was like a black heaven, man. I'm telling you,
dude. And you had the food.
Teresa Hotel. Yeah. And Teresa Hotel was like that plaza,
Right. I remember a lot of cats. You were doing photography at that point. You had already gotten how did you connect with that English magazine?
Yeah, because when I got out of the Air Force, I was doing photography, and that's when he connected, because I would be at these shows and he'd be coming at interview guys and he needed a photograph. So that's how he ended up hiring me as an official photographer for that magazine.
Who was this cat? He was doing interviews with the cats?
Yeah, he was interviewing all the cats. He interviewed Monk and everybody, and I never forget when Monk was on Time magazine, that's when he interviewed him right after that. And I was sitting with Monk and I said, hey, Monk, while we're talking, I said, Monk, how long would it take them to paint that picture of you on Time? He said, oh man, it took them like a couple of weeks, because, I'd go over there and nod out, and I'd come back, they'd tell me to come back another week, I'd go and nod out again, and they came back, they showed it to me, and I like it. I said, okay, and they put it on Time.
Oh,
but Monk was a classic. I loved Monk, man. It was just a genius.
Oh,
nicest cat, man.
This is so. You lived in Queens. You'd go. What were you seeing Trane like at the Village Gate or some art galleries?
Village Van everywhere. I saw Trane at the Village Vanguard, Village Gate. I saw him at Birdland when they recorded live, did all that stuff. Alabama and all that.
Where you saw the modal train? Oh my! Are you kidding me?
Yeah, look, man, they recorded Alabama. I want to talk about you. All those songs that's on that live Coltrane at Birdland. I was there for every night for that.
Did they have like a mobile truck outside? How were they? Did you know it was being?
I don't know. I never knew where the truck was at, but Pee Wee Marquette was always introducing them. So I knew Pee Wee, all those cats, because I was even working for Atlantic at the time when that record was made.
That's right. But that is. I just cannot believe that you came to New York in arguably one of the most fertile times in music history. I mean, it's when you so ultimately you started at Atlantic. That was the thing I wanted to ask you about. Was like, how much of the scene? I mean, I don't want to I did about 4 dozen interviews for a Stan Getz documentary. And I just wanted to ask you, not that you were like in with all the cats at that time, but was there? I mean, a lot of people said that if you weren't on junk, if you weren't smacked up, then you were on one side of the fence. And if part of it was like the Bird factor. Everyone was like, well, if we want to sound like Bird, so we got to get high, we got to do heroin, we got to shoot up.
I never saw that, because my timeline is this. I moved to New York in 58. In the summer of 58, I was 17. No, summer of 58. I was 16 years old. Let me see. I got out of school when I was 16. It's 58. Yeah, 58. And I went in the Air Force March of 59. But that time between the summer, June to March of 58 to 59, I was at jazz club nearly every night. You know what I'm saying?
That is
I would go to the city nearly every night. That's all I did. That's all I did was go to jazz clubs to hear people play.
I would have been with you. I would have been tagging along everywhere, dude. This is
And I would get on the subway by myself. A lot of time my cousin didn't want to. He didn't dig jazz.
It was too loud and noisy. Yeah.
Yeah, I go by myself to those clubs, and because I had a camera, I'd always get in like a press pass. A lot of time I'd have to pay to get in, and I'd get in and I'd make photographs and get right down front, and I heard all the music, and I loved it. And then I'll tell the cats after, hey man, I got a picture like Roy Haynes was shorter than me, a little cat, but was a bad mama jamma when it comes down to playing, and the only guy that Trane would play with when Elvin couldn't play, he would always get Roy Haynes.
That's right, dude. That's such an amazing point, dude.
Yeah, but I had a lot of respect for Roy because I played drums, when I was a kid, so I always loved drummers.
How amazing that cat is still swinging his ass off, It's
man can still play and still bad mama jamma, He's like 90-some years old.
Were you? Was the music changing at that time? Were cats going out? Were they leaving the bebop language a little bit? I know Miles. People would say he was bored to death. Yeah.
Let me just tell you. I'll give you a better timeline.
Yeah.
So now, when I went into the Air Force, which was 58, that's when Miles Counter Blue and all that came out, right?
Right.
But I was in the Air Force, and I was a photographer in the Air Force, right? So first time I caught Miles and Trane together was at Concert de Beau in Amsterdam on the last tour where the Trane played with them, right? And now I had never heard anybody blow octaves before in my life. I'd never heard. And now I wasn't a Coltrane fan at that time. I just liked the music. Of course, I had bought the album in Amsterdam. Kind of Blue, I bought it in Amsterdam. But now they play in the Concert de Beau, which is like a big, like the Philharmonic Hall of Amsterdam. And in that concert, the people are like down in an arena, like they down like in a, you go down, you could go down and sit, the stage is down in the pit.
Sure.
You come in up high,
sure.
You walk down stairs. Now, I was there right down there making photographs of these cats as they are playing. But as Miles is playing, Trane had gone to the bathroom, which is all the way upstairs. Miles is blowing with his eyes closed, and he finished blowing. And he turns around and no Trane. But now they still playing. They where the fuck is Trane? Boom. Trane started coming down. You could hear an ant piss on cotton in there, so quiet. Trane come downstairs and started blowing. Oh, that man, look here, blew me away.
Oh my God, that's the first. That is. Oh my God, you saw that, man.
Look, man, I was there. And he blew all the way down to the stage. All the way to the stage. Man, I had never heard. I thought the horn was squeaking. I thought it was messing up and stuff. But it freaked me out, man. And that blew me away, man. I mean, it just hung me out, man, to dry. And I've been tracing that music ever since.